11 years before Pavlov's discovery, in 1886, the Austrian neurologist Sigmund Freud, practicing hypnosis in the treatment of hysteria and nervous disorders, incidentally discovered free association after witnessing his colleague engage in curative discussion with a patient. Witnessing this therapeutic technique eventually led to Freud's creation of psychoanalysis, the introspective study of the human mind, in particular, his unconscious. Freud believed our personalities to be guided by non-conscious motives, and subscribed to the idea of our personality comprising of three distinct components: the id, that is unconscious, inner, wanton desires; the ego, the preconscious, relative interpretation of self; and the superego, which is the conscious and publicly adaptable persona. Freud suggested the id to contain a pleasure principle that we are born with, and denial of our unconscious wants could lead to neuroses. In order to cope with this neuroses, the ego constructs defense mechanisms for the superego, so as to reduce stress. These mechanisms manifest themselves through repression of unacceptable thought, regression of the psychosexual self, substitution of reality in favour of rationalization, projecting anxieties onto another, displacement of sexual regressive urges, and denial. Freud also suggested that we go through psychosexual stages of development in our adolescence in order to reach psychological maturity. These stages are oral, ingestion and fixation; anal, retention and impishness; phallic, misdirected sexual impulses and complexity; latency, hormonal and puberty; and genital, that is, reproductive development and awareness. He also theorized the existence of an Oedipus, or electro complex, within the phallic stage of psychosexual development, wherein the child finds its unrealized sexual desires directed towards the opposing genetic parent. This state of unrest, at least for Freud, can lead to feelings of rejection and confusion within the id. This frustration can sometimes find itself publicized via parapraxes. Inspired by the risque work of Freud and nihilistic realism of Nietzsche, Carl Jung offered numerous psychodynamic theories still discussed today. He founded analytical psychology and coined a plethora of complexes widely known in the modern world. Jung's teacher, the renowned contributory psychologist Eugen Bleuler, later taught Hermann Rorschach, the superstitious creator of klexography. Rorschach, the author of Psychodiagnostik, determined his inkblot test to provide insight into the psyche, with famed success. Nonetheless, this form of psychoanalysis is now considered pseudoscientific in nature. There are many caveats to accepting the dogmatic superstition buried beneath any overt sexual angst prevalent throughout psychoanalysis as a discipline. The small sample of case studies and lack of quantitative data, alongside Freud's predisposed negative disposition and uncomfortable childhood, leaves psychoanalysis under frequent eyes of skepticism, and many of his superfluous theories have found themselves somewhat disproven over time. Nonetheless, Freud argued the significance of childhood's psychological effects on the adult, encouraged interest in talking therapies, and heavily advocated the importance of onirology, such as his gorgeously imaginative 1900 magnum opus, The Interpretation of Dreams. Therefore, psychodynamic theory still remains a relevant perspective to this day. However, in 1957, dissatisfied with the rampant neurotic fatalistic perspective dominating psychoanalysis and behaviorism, Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers worked on a more positive, human-centric way to explain behavior under the belief that change is entirely possible. Their humanistic approach considers the individual in their entirety, with less regard to mental or introspective analysis. This type of study is referred to as holism. Both Maslow and Rogers in 1970 found our unfulfilled ambitions and aspirations act as a precursor to anxiety or discontent, and successful ascertainment of prerequisite needs such as hunger and belongingness would lead to a healthier life and later self-actualization. However, due to the non-empirically subjective and unverifiable nature of the humanistic approach to psychology, it never fully succeeded despite its numerous theoretical contributions to the field. Only 10 years later, in 1967, humanism and behaviorism found themselves overshadowed by another more advanced form of psychological apprehension, when Ulrich Neisser helped quicken the evolution of 20th century psychology, changing the normative psychological model of observable behaviorism and theoretical psychoanalysis to one of cognitive comprehension.